who are the top 10 greatest Detroit Lions of all time. Today, we're going to be talking about who those players that made up the Lions franchise history are. Starting off at number 10, we're going to go with Lomas Brown, seven-time Pro Bowler, one-time first-team All-Pro selection, tackle for 18 years in the NFL. Played majority of his career with the Detroit Lions. Very solid player for them throughout the late 80s and the early 1990s. Lomas Brown comes in at number 10. At number 9, we're going to go with two-time reception singles, two with Herman Moore, who led the league in receptions twice in his career. Several times had above 1,400 receiving yards, which is pretty impressive. His 1995 season, where he had 1,686 receiving yards, is probably the most notable. Three-time first-team All-Pro selection. One of the more underrated receivers of the 1990s. At number 8, we're going to go with Lem Barney, cornerback for the Lions throughout majority of the 70s. In my opinion, very underrated. Two-time first-team All-Pro selection, seven-time Pro Bowler, had 56 interceptions by the end of his career. Should have been three-time first-team All-Pro selection. He had 10 picks, leading the league as a rookie. Was just a dominant cornerback, great at running routes. Really kind of set the tone, set the foundation for players that would later come, such as Deion Sanders and Richard Sherman, who were as good as they were in zone coverage. At number 7, we're going to go with Alex Karras, multiple time first and second team All Pro selection, 7-time Pro Bowler, dominant defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions in the 60s. And one of the better pass rushing defensive tackles of all time, finishing his career with 100 sacks. He would have had a lot more had it not been for the fact that he got suspended 1 year in the middle of his prime due to gambling. But Alex Karras is certainly one of the greatest Lions of all time. And number 6, we're going to go with the all-time leading passer in the history of the Lions. Some people might have this a little too low, or the fact that he's number 6. I don't think that that's the case by any means. The 5 guys who are ahead of him either won a championship for the Lions or are widely regarded as the greatest player at their position for an extended period of time. Matthew Stafford never was. But at the same time, Stafford is one of the greatest quarterbacks in Lions history. One of the best deep ball passers of the 2010s for 12 years. Pretty much kept the Lions more relevant than they should have been. And certainly kept them in games that they should not have been in. Matthew Stafford comes in number 6. Number 5 is going to be a very, very old-time player, 1931 to 1938. One of the most versatile players in the history of the game. If anyone has seen mine and Akhilesh's video on the channel involving an all-time draft, I drafted this guy as my flex player, Dutch Clark, because he could play quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end at the time. Pretty much any offensive player position that you wanted him to. Dutch Clark comes in at number 5, being a 6-time first-team All-Pro selection, one-time NFL champion for the Lions. At number 4, we're going to go with Bobby Lane, very famous for his jump pass and his his throwing motion, as you can see here. Helped the Lions win a championship in, if I'm not mistaken, 1957. And after he got traded, there has been a very infamous hex put on the Lions as to why they cannot win a Super Bowl, or why they have not even been back to a Super Bowl since that time. Is that the reason why, even when Dan Campbell has made them as much of a contender as they still have yet to make a Super Bowl? We'll see. But Bobby Lane is nonetheless one of the greatest aerial passing threats in the pre-Super Bowl era. And had it not been for him, you would not have a guy like Matthew Stafford later on. But certainly he was one of the more dominant passers of the mid-50s, and definitely deserving of being number 4 on this list for his contributions to the franchise. Number 3, we're going to go with linebacker Joe Schmidt, one of the greatest linebackers in NFL history. If I'm not mistaken, 5-time first-team All-Pro selection, multiple-time Pro Bowler, and the best defensive player on that Lions team that won the Super Bowl in the night, or not the Super Bowl, the NFL championship in the 1950s. Joe Schmidt was really, really good at just being able to put a player on the ground. Hard hitter, not no, not in the same way that Ray Nitsky or Jack Lambert or other linebackers at that time were, but certainly did his job really, really well and was a pretty good pass rusher at that too. But he comes in at number three. At number two, we're going to go with Calvin Johnson, um, probably the best wide receiver of the early 2010s. Probably the greatest prime, other than maybe Jerry Rice and Randy Moss, in the history of the NFL. Just a yard machine. Megatron was just dominant as far as speed, size, everything he had. Nearly broke the record for the most receiving yards in a game back in 2013. Just incredible at high pointing the football, even in triple coverage and whatnot. Just made insane play after insane play. Had it not been for the fact that he only played 9 seasons, I have no doubt he would have gone down as maybe a top five, maybe top three receiver of all time. But Calvin Johnson comes in at number two on this Lions list. At number one, though, it's going to be Barry Sanders, a guy who, had he not retired early, which seems to be a theme with a lot of Lions players, he would have gone down undoubtedly as the greatest running back of all time. In my opinion, he's still top three. What he did in a 10-year span is nothing short of spectacular. His 1998 season, where he had 2,000 yards, is nothing short of unbelievable. He was a great pass catcher too, just great at making people miss, and was an All-Pro pretty much every year of his career. Barry Sanders is the number one player in Detroit Lions franchise history.